Hello, dear students. Today we will be discussing more about the social structure of the Roman Empire. Slavery was an institution deeply rooted in the ancient world, both in the Mediterranean and in the Near East. And Christianity, when it emerged as a state religion, seriously challenged this institution. Under Augustus, there were still 3 million slaves in a total Italian population of 7.5 million. Slaves were an investment, and at least one Roman agricultural writer advised landowners against using them because their health could not be damaged by malaria. On the other hand, if the Roman upper classes were often brutal towards their slaves, ordinary people did sometimes show much more compassion. As warfare became less widespread with the establishment of peace in the first century, the supply of slaves tended to decline, and the users of slave labor thus had to turn either to slave breeding or to cheaper substitutes such as wage labor, which was more easily dispensable. This you have to understand that slaves means you are hiring them for their entire life, and when you are having wage labor, that means that they are on contract basis. Suppose if you have kept them for a month, so you are giving them wages only for a month, you are not bothering about their entire life. In fact, free labor was extensively used on public works at Rome because an extensive use of slave labor would have been too expensive. Slaves had to be fed and maintained throughout the year, which increased the cost of holding this kind of labor. Now, try to understand some of the social hierarchies in the Rome. The social structures of the empire was as follows. Senators, requits. Requits were the horsemen and the knights. The respectable section of the people, which is known as the middle class, lower class, and the finally was the slaves. In the 3rd century, when the Senate numbered roughly 1000, approximately half of all senators still came from Italian families. So, by the late empire, the senators and the equites had merged into a unified and expanded aristocracy. The middle class now consisted of the considerable mass of persons connected with imperial service in the bureaucracy and army, but also the more prosperous merchants and farmers, of whom there were many in the eastern provinces. Below them were the vast mass of the lower classes, known as collectively as the lower class. They comprised a rural labor force of which many were permanently employed on the large estates. Workers in industrial and mining establishments, migrant workers who supplied much of the labor for the grain and olive harvest, and for the building industry, self-employed artisans, etc. They were all in the lower class. One writer of the early 5th century tells us that the aristocracy based in the Rome drew annual income of up to 4,000 pounds of gold from their estates, not counting the produce they consumed directly. The late Roman bureaucracy, both the higher and the middle echelons, was a comparatively affluent group because it drew the bulk of its salary in gold and invested much of this in buying up assets like land. There was, of course, also a great deal of corruption, especially in the judicial system and in the administration of the military supplies. The traditional religious culture of the classical world, both Rome and Greek, had been polytheist. That means it is involved in a multiplicity of cults that included both Roman Italian gods like Jupiter, Juno, Minerva, and Mars, as well as numerous Greek and Eastern deities worshipped in the thousands of temples, shrines, and sanctuaries throughout the empire. At the cultural level, the period saw momentous developments in religious life, with the Emperor Constantine made Christianity as the official religion. Overexpansion had led Diocletian to cut back by abandoning territories with little strategy or economic value. Diocletian also fortified the frontiers, reorganized provincial boundaries, and separated civilians from the military functions, granting greater autonomy to the military commanders who now became a more powerful group. The monetary system of the late empire broke with the silver based currencies of the first 3 centuries because the Spanish silver mines were exhausted and government ran out of sufficient stocks of the metal to support a stable coinage in silver. Constantine founded the new monetary system on gold, and there were vast amounts of this in circulation. Constantine's chief innovations were in the monetary sphere, where he introduced a new denomination, the solidus. This is very important. The solidus, which is a coin of 4.5 grams of pure gold, that would in fact outlast the Roman Empire itself. Solidi was minted on a very large scale and their circulation ran into millions. The other area of innovation was division of Roman Empire into East and West and the creation of a second capital as Constantinople at the site of modern Istanbul in Turkey and previously called Byzantium, surrounded on 3 sides by the sea. In the west, the empire fragmented politically as Germanic group from the north took over all the major provinces and established kingdoms that are best described as post-Roman kingdoms. By the early 7th century, the war between Eastern Rome and Iran had flared up again, and the Sasanian, who had ruled Iran since the 3rd century, launched a wholesale invasion of all the major eastern provinces, including Egypt.